We're in Nieuport, which looks like it's spelled Nieuport, in Belgium, which is on the coast, so it's really just across the channel. And we're in this hotel, and I was in this hotel the last time about 3 years ago, and it's been very different. They've done a lot of things. You know, lockdown has kept us away, so this whole kind of, I don't know, chalet and caravan park's being built. And they built a swimming pool in this hotel. So we're here for a very specific purpose. 3 years ago, I had a boat moored in the marina, and I haven't seen that boat for 3 years. So I'm going to have a little look at it now and see what it looks like. I had some people manage to get the boat started and lift it out of the water, and they've been doing some work on it. They've cleaned it, I hope, and they've anti-fouled it and stuff like that. But I'm hoping that it looks like it's been a little bit looked after, because a boat neglected for 3 years looks very sad. So let's go and see what's happening. One of the nice things about Belgium is there are so many cyclists, and the cycle paths are fantastic. It just bears paying attention to though when you're driving, especially if you come from England, where cycling is a different matter again. No, I'm good with this one. Now, where is she? Yeah. I think we found it tucked away in a corner over here. It's always fascinating being in boatyards. I love boatyards. So much possibility, so much potential adventure, so many experiences locked up in people's boats. And some of them are looking, you know, really historic. Look at the size of these things. Monstrous. Ah, I think I see her. There she is. Oh, wow. Look at this, they've done a fantastic job.
Hey, they've done a nice job, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, my first impression is that they've done a very good job in cleaning and anti-fouling the hull. I know I saw photographs and she looked pretty neglected, but now she looks, well, pretty good actually, to be honest. I'm very, very pleased with the way. We had some stains on the front. The water in Belgium here is often quite brackish on the inland waterways, etc. And it gets stained, and I managed to take that off. And there she is. These are all the fenders from the sides of the boats. The people here at Aqualift, I had them bring the boat from where it was and bring it over here, and these are all the fenders and sort of ropes that attach the boat. It's all looking a bit dirty and sorry. But here we are in the cockpit of Palomar 2 for the first time in 3 years. Again, looking a bit sorry for itself, but that's the nature of neglect, I guess. Let's have a look what she's like down below.
I know, I think I'm not going to get your shoes off, but what can you expect?
It's pretty clean. There's the dinghy's down there.
Oh my god.
Dinghy down there. Well, it was on the
Yeah,
thing, you know. Yeah. Looks a little derelict inside. That's just messy, really. Yes.
Yeah. These are those lovely little.
I saw it looks
You can eat it. Just chew it.
Nieuport's quite an interesting place, really. I mean, it's a seaside town, and it is absolutely covered, full of acres and acres and acres of boats, and acres and acres and acres and even more acres of seaside flats. Just from here to Ostend, which is like miles, just constant flats on the seaside. And the beach, of course, goes for miles. It's just a flat sand beach. And where I am sitting right now, they actually bring a ship in here to offload sand, so they kind of dredge for sand, and then they pile the sand over there, and it blows all over the place when it's windy, which it always is in Nieuport. So Nieuport was flattened in the First World War. So this whole town was basically flattened because this was the end of the Western Front in the First World War, and the Western Front went along the river Lippe, or Ypres, and it basically defined, the Allied as opposed to the German side. And the the Belgians, they flooded this whole area. It was called the polders, and then you had the sort of bogged down in mud kind of idea, which slowed up the advance of the German troops. And there's a big monument just over there to King Leopold, who kind of was the sort of the figurehead of the Belgian resistance during the First World War. So anyway, it's quite an interesting area with respect to First World War. You can be wandering along and you can happen upon a trench that's been preserved from that period, or a museum about First World War stuff. So we've travelled around a bit and done some of that investigation. So there are a lot of boats here, and there are a lot of people who make a good living fixing boat engines. And I was thinking about this because when I came over to see the little boat, I was the big boat, I was apprehensive because I didn't know what state it would be in. But you've got to just sort of bite the bullet and in a sense, work the problem. Now, if you have an engine that doesn't work, your symptom is that the engine doesn't work. You don't know why it doesn't work particularly, because it hasn't been investigated. And I think that's like mental health problems. We have really good access to symptoms, and we often have really good, strong, we all have a strong relationship with symptoms, but we don't necessarily know what the problem is that causes the symptoms. So let's have an example. Let's think about panic. It's very common for people who struggle with panic to have chest pains. And chest pains are so significant. We always think of chest pains as being indicative of a heart attack. That people who struggle with panic often end up in the accident and emergency, once or twice or 3 times, because the chest pains are physical symptoms and you just can't ignore them. But after being checked out, it's very common for people who struggle with panic to be told that actually you don't actually have anything wrong with your heart at all. What it is a panic disorder. And then that takes them to see someone who can deal with a panic disorder. So when we have symptoms, we don't necessarily know what the problem is. We just have a real kind of attention-grabbing experience with symptoms. Likewise, with generalized anxiety disorder, what we might call anxiety, we have a feeling of unease, but we don't really know why we have that feeling. So we have the symptoms, but we can't move to the next level behind the symptoms to figure out what the problem actually is. So what I'd like to do is to talk about what I'm calling the 3 portals to anxiety. And this, of course, would be true of anxiety, but it's also true of many other problems. And it's about how we get lost in the symptoms and we forget then to move back. So the portal takes you through the symptoms to the underlying problem that is actually the cause of the symptoms to a large degree. So let's think about the first one. Physical symptoms are incredibly attention grabbing, and they're attention grabbing because they're the first thing. It's like saying my engine doesn't work. That grabs your attention. My engine doesn't work. Okay, but physical symptoms are they're attention grabbing, but if we focus our attention on them, we can end up magnifying them and we're no wiser. So to a degree, where you put your attention determines what your experience is. Your whole brain works on automatic pilot, but your attention is that conscious bit that you have access to. And if you put your attention on the symptoms, it tends to magnify the symptoms, but it also tends to make the symptoms feel more meaningful than they actually need to be. Symptoms, all symptoms, they come and they go. They're stronger or they're weaker. But when we focus on them and when we give them meaning, this means something. So for instance, this chest pain means that I'm having a heart attack, which is like a heck of a thing, right? You've got to get that checked out. Yeah, but it doesn't actually. With panic, the chest pain and the tight chest is a consequence typically of hyperventilation. Because when we hyperventilate, when we, even if we're not consciously aware of it, when we hyperventilate, we're disrupting the balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen in our blood. And that alters the chemical composition of our blood, and that gives us chest pain. So the symptom of chest pain is actually caused typically by hyperventilation. Although if we attribute it to having a heart attack, we have to get that checked out. And that doesn't actually give us it doesn't move us any further forward because it's the wrong attribution. So when we give symptoms very powerful meanings, it magnifies their place in our world in a sense, and it makes us really a hostage to them rather than just being symptoms that come and symptoms that go. So what I'm suggesting is this. Symptoms are transient, and when we focus attention on them, undue attention, obviously you can't ignore symptoms, but when we focus undue attention on them, we kind of magnify them and we kind of hold them in place, and then we give them more meaning than they need to have, and then that turns them into something. that then starts to control us, rather than us recognizing a symptom as a transient experience. And a symptom actually isn't the problem. A symptom is a symptom of the problem, and we've got to recognize that a symptom is a symptom of the problem. We've got to figure out what the problem is. Otherwise, we never get past the symptom. And that's, to a degree, I think, a problem that we have with mental health in general, really, is that we get locked into the symptoms and we tend not to think about what the problem is behind the symptom, and therefore nothing changes. Unless you work the problem, really, nothing changes. Well, why would it? I know it's impossible to ignore symptoms, but I'm suggesting a balance, because every time we give symptoms a lot of meaning, or we give them a lot of attention, we're creating a path to a future we don't want. We don't want more symptoms, we want less symptoms. But every time we really feed them and attribute them really powerful intentions or powerful meanings, we're kind of making it more likely that we'll have them again. The second portal, really, I think, to anxiety and many other mental health problems is catastrophizing. We need to stop catastrophizing. I mean, catastrophizing, right? It's basically saying, this is going to be horrendous. This is going to be as bad as it could possibly be. I've got no idea how this could possibly work out. It's disastrous. You know, I mean, logic and your own experience tells you that that's not actually what happens. Very rarely does a catastrophe come true, but always does a catastrophe make you feel more vulnerable and more anxious. Catastrophizing is just it's just a trick that we do, right? It's just something, it's a habit more than anything else, and we have to stop doing it, because the catastrophizing tends to ramp up the anxiety, which ramps up the symptoms, and then that makes it, you know, more of a problem than it needs to be. If we can recognize catastrophizing as a thing, we can make an effort to stop doing it, because it's basically precipitating the process of worry. It creates worry, but it doesn't help us in any way. So we have to stop catastrophizing, because that's a real portal to every mental health problem, to be honest. And it's not that hard to do, to stop catastrophizing. But the first thing they have to do is to recognize that you're doing it, and then to sort of make an intention to be more balanced in your interpretation of things, right? So if you're prone to catastrophizing, recognize that the catastrophe that you would tend to think that's going to happen never actually happens. I think the third portal to many mental health problems, particularly anxiety and depression, is what lies do you tell yourself that you're prepared to believe? All mental health problems are to some degree created by the lies we tell ourselves. Now, we don't think we're lying, but it's obvious that we are, okay? So if you had to challenge one of the lies that you tell yourself, it's obvious it's not right. So what would be a typical lie? I'm not good enough. That's a typical self-esteem, low self-esteem lie, right? I am not good enough. And when you challenge it, like, well, what are you not good enough in? Oh, well, I don't know, I just don't feel good enough. Yeah, that's a different thing, right? Feeling not good enough is not the same as not being good enough. Okay, well, I feel like a fraud or a failure. Okay. And what are you a fraud or a failure in? You can't put your finger on it. There's nothing. I feel like I'm a fraud or a failure. Yeah, okay. Doesn't make it true, right? I feel really anxious. I feel threatened. Yeah, okay. But are you threatened? No. Okay. So these are lies. These are errors. This is wrong, right? I am not good enough. I am a fraud or a failure. People don't like me. People don't love me. These are not actually true statements. They're feelings that they're interpreted, but they're actually lies you tell yourself. And if you're prepared to believe these lies, lots of other things start to happen. So, for instance, what are you frightened of doing? What are you avoidant of doing? What is it that you would, like, oh, I don't fancy that. Like, oh, no, that doesn't really appeal to me at all. No, I wouldn't want to do that. What sort of things are you reducing your life by? Because these tell you the kinds of lies that you tell about yourself. We can extend it a little bit further and say, well, what stories do you tell yourself? What stories are you telling yourself? And are those stories that you're telling yourself, are they helpful? Or are they unhelpful? Because we have choice, right? We don't have to just tell ourselves unhelpful, untrue stories. I mean, we have ownership, right? You have absolutely complete ownership over the stories you tell yourself. And to be honest, if you think about it, you have ownership over the lies that you're prepared to believe about yourself. So, all mental health problems include and are perhaps 60% of it is this. We have symptoms, and we can't ignore symptoms, but we don't need to pile our attention into symptoms because that makes the symptom more likely to come back again. When we pile our attention into symptoms, we're feeding them that little bit of consciousness that we have available to ourselves, and that makes them more likely to come back again. The second thing is that we have to stop catastrophizing, because we're basically going, this is going to be a nightmare, this is going to be as bad as it could possibly be, and it never is. It's pointless. Catastrophes almost never come true. And when catastrophes do come true, they're probably genuine accidents. And an accident, by definition, is difficult to prepare for because it's an accident. It's unforeseen. And the third thing is we've got to kind of go, well, look, if I'm not having the life I want, I have to stop believing lies about myself, and I have to sort of manage the stories I tell myself. You are no different, really, in principle, from the other 8 billion people that inhabit this planet. You don't have massive limitations. I mean, you might have social or a few genetic or cultural limitations, but you as a person don't have any more limitations than anyone else. And therefore, your role, I would suggest, is to live to your full potential. And to do that, we have to stop putting ourselves down and making our life smaller than it needs to be. And actually, we want to expand our life so that it is bigger. It's a bigger life. It's as big as it can be. And if it gets too big, then circumstances will kind of say, well, this is enough. This is the barrier. But we've got to push it until circumstances stop us from pushing further. Otherwise, we're not performing to our full potential. We create our life by the choices we make. Now, you might say, I've got no choice in my life. Well, that's clearly wrong, okay? You might have limited choices, but if you've only got 2 choices, then one of those choices is more useful and one of those choices is less useful. So, little by little, bit by bit, over the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of choices you make, you create the experience you have. Now, I believe that to be true, and I think it is adequately demonstrated by scientific research. And it's just, if you just think about your own life, right? You can choose to do this or you can not choose to do it. You can choose to do this or that. You have choice. And we're always choosing. Now, when you're over-focused on physical symptoms, when you catastrophize, and when you're telling yourself lies, telling negative stories about yourself, it affects the choices that you're able to make. It affects the choices that you feel confident in making. When I talk to people who struggle with anxiety, often we set homeworks where you have to challenge yourself a little bit. It is always the case that people say, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. Yeah, because you're challenging it. But think about what the alternative would be. The alternative would be to not challenge it. And then that limitation remains in place in your life and you are limited. And who wants to be limited? It's an unnecessary limitation. To have the life that you want to have, you have to test the limits that you place upon yourself. Because I swear to you, very few other people are placing limits on you, because most people are self-absorbed and self-interested, and nobody's really paying that much attention to you that they're actually placing limits on you. So your job is to find the limit of your own experience, do what you can do, and have a great time doing it. So I hope you find this interesting. Please subscribe. Please check out the Anxiety Wizard program if you're interested in really getting rid of anxiety, eradicating it from your life, and staying free of anxiety, because that's quite doable. It just requires a little bit of time and effort to do it. So I'm here in Nieuport, and it's a lovely day, to be honest. I complain about the wind because if you're trying to make video, wind's not your friend, because it gets in the microphone. But it does keep the place cool, and that's actually going to be a very, very hot weekend, a very, very hot week. And so the wind is actually quite pleasant. I'm going to go down to the beach and watch all the beach goers. This is a great place for kids and all manner of perambulating vehicles are on the beachfront. So let's see how that goes.